This is Story Saloon, short stories, centre stage. I'm Jane Messer. In this episode, we're going to hear Dance Hall Days by Christos Tsiolkas from our September 2 show. Tsiolkas is the Melbourne-born Greek-Australian author, playwright, essayist and screenwriter internationally known for his award-winning novels Dead Europe, Loaded, The Slap, Barracuda and much more. In this story, we meet Dimitri and Marlene, former friends who haven't seen each other since the 1980s Melbourne party and music scene. The story is from the anthology Into Your Arms, Nick Cave's songs Reimagined. 20 Australian writers were invited to write a story in response to a Nick Cave song. Dance Hall Days is Tsiolkas' riff on that Nick Cave challenge, a moving story about having been young, getting older, forgiving parents, and Melbourne's 1980s music scene back in the days when Nick Cave was just starting out. Dance Hall Days is read by Alex Dimitriades. There is quite a history between these two creatives, with Dimitriades starring in the film Head On, adapted from Tsiolkas' first novel Loaded. He's also starred in The Slap, based on Tsiolkas' hugely popular novel of the same name. But Alex Dimitriades is known for many other film and television roles, including Heartbreak High, Total Control and The Tourist, and he won the Film Critics Circle of Australia Award for Best Actor for his role in Head On. Now here's Alex Dimitriades reading Dance Hall Days.
I was shopping for Christmas presents when I bumped into Marlene. It was a sweltering day, the oppressive heat coming on unexpectedly after days of shitty wintry weather that had us pulling out jumpers and overcoats. I decided to visit my aunt in Oakley, who had recently been in hospital for day surgery. I found her tethering the tomato plants in the garden. She ignored my protestations that she should be resting. "Staying in bed makes you sicker," she snorted. She brewed coffee and ordered me to eat 2 large pieces of the spinach pie that she had baked that morning. Afterwards, I headed to the local shopping strip. We decided not to buy new gifts this year. Our nieces and nephews were now mostly adults. Only Eva and Simon were under 18. My intention was to buy only from op shops and small trinkets or second-hand books. By noon, the temperature had reached the high 30s, and I was glad to enter the cool of Vinnie's on Crew Road. I wandered the aisles and stopped to rummage through a collection of old vinyl records. There was little of interest: classical selections, Bach and Tchaikovsky, the glue long unstuck from the seals on the cover, or disco 12 inches from the 80s. I picked up a copy of Aretha Franklin's Freeway of Love and grinned at the garish pink and purple colours on the sleeve. A voice behind me, a little gravelly, the tell of a smoker, muttered, "That's not one of her best." "Well," I answered, still holding up the record, "it's Aretha, so there's lots of competition." I turned. "Marlene, is that you?" It was startling to see her without makeup. At high school, she had been the first goth, her face plastered with white powder that accentuated the almond curve of her enormous eyes. Back then, she was always getting into trouble for dyeing the skirts and jumpers of her uniform black. She was heavier now, and her hair was completely grey, cut short in almost martial style. When we were young, she always wore it long, and she would tease it and gel it so it seemed to rise up in a jagged halo of raven lightning bolts from atop her head. Yet those eyes were unmistakable, and they still flashed with a becoming sharpness. She nodded, and then abruptly, but in a gesture that conveyed affection, she grabbed my arm. "No need to ask whether it is really you," she chuckled, and then added, "Seriously, I'm so proud of what you've done." I mumbled a thank you and held up the old record. My niece Sonia, obsessed with 80s kitsch. "I'm thinking of giving her this as a gift." She shrugged. "It's certainly kitsch." That did it. I decided to buy the record. She let go of my arm. "Have you got time for a coffee?" I followed her as she marched across the arcade. The unrelenting heat had driven everyone indoors. The banks of outdoor seats were empty. She turned down a small side street and we entered a tiny coffee shop, arrays of Balkan and Mediterranean cakes behind the glass, the counter covered with orthodox Christmas breads. She curtly nodded at the young women behind the counter, and we ordered our coffees. That done, she swerved and continued walking out the back of the shop, past the narrow kitchen where an older man and a youth were stripped down to their singlets. The blast from the ovens was brutal, and they were constantly raising their arms to their brows to wipe away the sweat. "Yasu Niko, hello Pavi," she called out. The young man smiled at her and nodded in greeting. The old Greek was grimly fixed on his task of kneading the rolls. She opened the back door that led to the toilet. There was a garden table and 2 chairs, the white paint chipped and curling along the slats of the furniture. An ashtray near overflowing with butts was sitting on the table. "Good," Marlene announced with a wide grin. "It's free." She plonked herself on a chair and I sat from across her. She rummaged through her handbag and pulled out a packet of cigarettes. I didn't recognize the wrapper. It wasn't the usual fecal brown of Australian packets. She offered me one and I shook my head. "You don't mind if I smoke?" "No, not at all." Though I was starting to regret my agreeing to the coffee, there was no shade in the small courtyard, and there was a sour ammonia stink coming from the bins a few meters away from us. The sun was directly above us. She lit the cigarette, blew out a long trail of smoke. "Dimitri owns this place, lets me smoke here. Oakley used to be great for smokers." Her face soured. Then fucking Labour decided they needed to out-nanny state the Greens on the council, and they started getting Nazi with the fines. Poor Dimitri got saddled with thousands of bucks of fines over one weekend. She smiled sadly. "He's a good anarchist, keeps his place here for old die-hard gaspers like me." I was looking down at my lap at the record. Would the heat buckle it? The young woman came out with the coffees and placed them on the table. And as she did so, she took a puff from the cigarette and then handed it back to Marlene. Marlene leaned across and pointed at the vinyl. "Hey, Yasleen, be a love and put this behind the counter." With an embarrassed smile, I handed her the record. "And Yaz," Marlene added, "can we have some water?" The latte was good, strong and aromatic. I sipped at it slowly, suddenly, shy. It had been decades since we had seen each other. Marlene and I had been friends, good friends even. Yet I also had been intimidated by her querulous energy. In that wistful vertigo, there was a flash of memory. Our last year at high school. A party at Christine Singer's house and me getting up excitedly to dance to Echo and the Bunnymen's The Cutter. I'd loved that song. I loved that record and I had a crush on the drummer, Pid DeFreitas. Marlene had refused to get up and dance. She was slouched on the sofa, smoking a joint and looking bored in a tight black bodice and a skirt of heavy purple faux satin. The blue and white swirls of the evil eyes sitting on her plum cleavage. "Come on," I insisted, "come dance." She'd shaken her head. "I'm disappointed in the new LP," she answered. "It's not a patch on crocodiles." I nodded my assent, though I continued dancing. My joy in the song had gone. "Fuck you, Marlene." I was glad I'd bought Freeway of Love, I chuckled. "What?" "Nothing," I answered. "I was just thinking of us at high school and how we thought we knew it all." Marlene affected a mock shudder. "God, I hated that time. I thought everyone hated me. And I thought everyone pitied me." Marlene butted out the cigarette and grabbed her bag off the ground, placed it on the table. She searched, found a handkerchief, and raised first her left arm and then her right, wiping furiously. I noticed that her armpits were unshaven, and I silently berated myself. I was disturbed at the thickness of the swirls of glistening black hair. "Excuse me." She got to her feet and pushed open the door to a small lean-to, the shed next to the toilet. She came back pulling at an old cantilever garden umbrella. She shook it, and it rained a fine dust. She promptly raised it and pushed the long rod through the hole of the table. One of the shades was torn, but the sudden sweep of shudder was glorious. She fell back on her chair. "Sorry," she muttered. "I'm hopeless in the heat." And then shrugging, added, "Though I'm fucking hopeless in all weather nowadays." She lit up another cigarette. "I seem to be enduring the longest menopause in history," she grimaced. "God is male and he fucking hates women." But after a long draw of water, she was smiling. "Tell me, what are you working on now? Is it television or is it a movie?" The ancient, wicked force of the impulse was staggering. I had to stop myself from reaching for the cigarette packet. "Nothing," I said quietly. I loved you in that movie. It was a few years ago where you played a Serb farmer and your son had lost his kid. I cried in that movie. It was so beautiful. What was it called? Tribute. And that old pleasant vanity returned, the flush of pride. That's right. You made a good Serb. Jedno lice, jedno raca. One face, one race. Marlene laughed out loud. Did I teach you that? I nodded, laughing as well. In the toilets at the back of the Collingwood Club, after woofing up 2 strong lines of speed, she and I staring at our faces in the dirty mirror. And hadn't she said to me that night, you should try makeup. You'd make a pretty girl. It was a good movie. It was, but it had lasted a week in the cinemas. I hadn't spoken to Zoran for over 2 years. Was he still trying to get a new film up? Poor bastard had spent 12 years on Tribute, battling with the funding bodies who questioned the family being Serbian, who wanted the old man to be played by a Sam Neill or Russell Crowe. He'd remortgaged his apartment, and by the time we had finished the shoot, the new regime at Screen Australia thought the family was too white. God, how I hated the industry. I slurped the last of my coffee and realised that Marlene was looking at me quizzically. I've given up acting. Don't say that. Her tone was adamant. You're good. We're so proud of you. She took a hold of my hand, her grasp firm and vital. I saw a Tribute with Stephen Chan. Remember him? Terribly handsome, an immaculate dresser. The first boy I knew to wear pomade in his hair. Or at least one who wasn't an uncle. How is he? He's good. We've kept in touch. He comes out regularly to visit his mother. He's been living in Zurich for decades. She scratched at her forehead. His lover died and left him a fortune. Oh, I'm sorry about his lover. I never knew him. He was old even back then. Stephen met him when he was a steward for Qantas. That wasn't long after school. Still, that's a long time together. It must be difficult for him. I swallowed. The grief, I mean. Yes, there was something hard in how she bit on the word. Her hand hovered over the cigarette packet. She drew it back. Anyway, he loved the film as well. Her voice became a growl. You have to keep acting. I did not look at her. I'm too old. Bullshit. And it's too hard. Her silence unnerved me. I glanced over at her. She was nodding. You were never ruthless. Another shaming rise of memory, performing in a theatrical adaptation of The Return of Martin Guerre at Belvoir. Overhearing Kate and Neil chatting, her saying, he's talented and a nice guy, but he prefers the shadows. And him exclaiming, yes, there's no fire in him. The pity in both their voices. I sipped the last of my water. C's and I have bought a farm, a small place near Dean's Marsh. We're retiring there. Even as I said the words, they sounded stilted. We'd both finish our coffee. I didn't want another one. What does he do? He's an engineer. His passion is the environment. He was in parks and management. He's good at what he does, and I'm sure he could work from anywhere. I could hear it, the pride returning to my voice. He wants a farm, and he wants to raise goats, and he wants some peace. This time I placed my hand over hers. Maybe we're not old, Marlene, but we're definitely not young. She didn't move, and yet I sensed her discomfort. I pretended to yawn and move my hand away. And how's Jackson? Are you both still working for the unions? Her tone was dispassionate. Jackson died 5 years ago. Cancer. It was fast. Thankfully, it was fast. I didn't move. I didn't say anything. We no longer knew each other. She reached for her cigarettes, and this time she took one out of the packet and lit it. Her decision activated mine. I got up and grabbed her tight. There was the frightening moment of resistance. Had I angered her? And then she allowed me to embrace her. My face was in her hair. I smelt the lime scent of her shampoo, the dank odour of her sweat, and the wafting plumes of tobacco. And then I released her. She wiped her eyes. There were only a few tears. I'm okay, she said, smiling again. You know I'm a tough cunt. I sat back in the chair. You're certainly that. It's been hardest for Rena. She sucked on her cigarette. Our daughter. How old is she? 27. There was a magnificent fierceness to her mien as she sat there blowing out a long draft of smoke, her back straight and rigid. Jackson wanted kids. I wasn't sure. She looked at me, her gaze unforgiving. I was right. I'm not a very good mother. She won't allow me to begin an objection. Don't say a fucking word. I'm not a terrible mother. I'm not a cruel or violent or vindictive parent. But being a mother bored the shit out of me. Jackson was a good father. He loved it. So I don't carry any guilt. She winked at me. You and I survived our parents. Rena can survive me. And we're not in our late 50s. We are in our late teens, and I'm crying and trying to fight Miss Vlahovic off her daughter, a woman transfigured into a banshee from her daughter's stubbornness and defiance, a sponge sodden with soap, water in her hands as she tries to slash makeup from Marlene's face. Mr. Vlahovic banging fist hard into his forehead behind us, shouting, "Nemoj, nemoj, Marika!" And not long after that, my own mother is howling and punching her own breasts and shouting, "He's killing me, Marlene! He's destroying me!" And I'm sobbing. And Marlene is saying over and over, "He's no different, Eleni. He's still your son. He still loves you and you still love him." And my mother is leaping from her chair, her face miraculously now free of tears, screaming at me, "Ohi, I do not love him. I can never love who he is." Yes, we survived them, and we buried them, and we loved them, and we know now that they loved us. Rena will be okay, I said. The tinny and muffled ringtone made us both jump. Marlene rummaged through a bag, grabbed her phone and glanced at it. She mouthed, "Sorry." Speak of the devil. There was a brightness to Marlene's tone as she spoke into the phone. A cheer that sounded hollow. She turned her body away from me. I picked up my phone and opened my mail, swiped, deleted. She doesn't have to pay me now, but she does have to pay me. Marlene's voice dropped to a low burr. She was hunched over, and the suggestion of something meek in her posture saddened me. It aged her. "Not now," she continued. "We'll speak about it later." The metal legs of the chair scraped across the cement as she moved further away from the table. I opened Google, typed in the words "The Guardian," tried to look fascinated as I scrolled. "I'm with an old friend from high school." She mentioned my name. "You know, the actor." Marlene clicked her tongue in annoyance. "You do know him," she insisted. I got up and pointed to the toilet. They're upstairs, by the way. The roof was a sheet of corrugated iron and the heat was broiling. The small space reeked of urine. Urine. I pissed, flushed, and sprayed a sickly sweet deodorizer over the toilet bowl. A pipe rattled and groaned as I turned on the tap. A weak stream of water was an ugly brown. I wiped my hands over my shorts and went back outside. Marlene was holding her phone. She smiled listlessly as I took my seat. I bought Rena a ticket to the Nick Cave concert at Hanging Rock for her birthday last month. There was a disquieting monotone in her voice. "Did you go?" "No, I wished I had." I thought it'd be a nice mother and daughter thing to do. We don't share a lot of things, but we do both love him. As Marlene sat up, there was a snap of anger in her voice, and the ire seemed to animate her. She no longer seemed old. Anyway, she asked if it was okay if I gave my ticket to her girlfriend, Ariana. Like a fuckwit, I said yes. But now they're both pissed off with me because I'm insisting that her friend pays me back the money for her ticket. Her hand took the lighter. Am I being unfair? I thought back to our parents, even though they hated the clothes that we wore and how we cut our hair and the music that we listened to and how Australian we were becoming. Dad would always slip $20 in my pocket before I went out. And no matter whatever time we came home, even if it was at dawn, Marlene's mother would be up waiting for her. No, Marlene, you're not being unfair. She still smoked the same way she did as a young woman, vehemently, as if sucking the life out of her cigarettes. Remember that birthday party gig at the ballroom? Her eyes flashed. That was amazing. I think that was the best speed I've ever had. I nodded, and the sourness of the coffee I just had and the saltiness of the sweat on my lips tasted of that night so long ago in the toilets of the club when when Cole and I had just snorted drugs. And the rush was building from a knot in the back of my head and exploding through my body. Cole's eyes were wide, shining, as he leaned in and kissed me. That first time, his sourness and his saltiness. I had to pull you and Cole out of the guy's dunny, remember? I thought we were going to miss the band. I laughed out loud. I was just thinking about that. You were furious and pushing and shoving everyone, making a beeline to the mosh pit. Cole and I just followed you. She was beaming. Yeah, I was always the best at getting up front. And then they started playing Release the Bats, and Cole and I are thrashing and pogoing, and I turn around to see you with your arms crossed, looking daggers at the stage. I winked at her. You hated that song. She was no longer smiling. No, I didn't. And then she relented. Did I? You thought they were taking the piss out of the goths. She stubbed out her cigarette. I was right. She shook with laughter. I was a bit of a self-righteous prick, wasn't I? I met him once. Even as I uttered the words, I was embarrassed. Nick Cave? Yeah, it was around the time I was cast in that Weir film. I winced and hesitated. Go on, she said gently. And I was prepared to act, to perform, to recite a story that I'd told over countless dinner tables, to embellish a small, quiet moment and turn it into an anecdote. Marlene was staring intently at me. I was not going to bullshit. It was an interview for a radio station in Sydney. I got there early and he was already in the green room. He was smoking and he offered me a cigarette. It was a few minutes together and he asked me about the film. He was charming. And then some guy came in and said, "It's time, Mr. Cave." And how he had turned and he was leaving and mouthed the words, "Good luck." How enormous that polite and gracious gesture had been for me. I smiled at Marlene. That's it. Not much of a story. It's good to know he isn't a prick. I leaned across the table. Marlene, you said to me once that you'd been to a party in St Kilda and Cave was there with all these musos and they had a cassette tape of a woman being murdered. You said that all these musos were sitting around laughing at the woman's terror and that you were pissed off and you shouted at them all. And that you told them they're all fucking sexist degenerates and you stormed off. She didn't blink. It wasn't true. She looked down and the sheepish cast of shame disguised the grey hair and the double chin and the deep wrinkles at the corners of her mouth. She looked so very young. It was probably a story I heard off someone and wanted to make my own. She shook her head violently as if needing to dislodge the past. I thought it was just a daggy, ugly wog chick. I desperately wanted to be cool. I grabbed her hand and this time didn't let go. On leaving, we exchanged numbers and she bought me a loaf of the Orthodox Christmas bread. On the street, she kissed me goodbye hard on the lips. I was halfway down the freeway when I remembered the record. It was too late to turn back. C's was still at work. I wandered to our back room where we keep all the old vinyl. I pulled out a copy of Junkyard, thought about wrapping it up and gifting it to Sonia. I sat and stared at the cover, at the gruesome heavy metal cartoon of the grinning monster riding the steampunk truck. I put it back and kept flicking through the records until I came across an old 12-inch single, You Spin Me Round Like a Record. The faded green price tag from Brash's still stuck on the sleeve. I pulled it off the shelf and held it up for the longest time, until I heard the click in the door, until C's came home. Thank you.
The live readings for Story Saloon at the Vanguard were recorded by Martin Gallagher. Your host has been Jane Messer. A big thanks to the whole Story Saloon team.